All right, it is quite clear that President Biden is going to make January 6th the theme of his reelection campaign. Play clip 8.
Let me say what others cannot. We must reject political violence in America. Always, not sometimes, always. It's never appropriate. Violence of January 6th was an extension of an old playbook from the threats and violence and intimidation.
You know what? I have said that. In fact, I've spoken out. I think January 6th was foolish for those who violated the law. But it was a riot. It was an insurrection. You don't have insurrections with signs and placards and flags. But I was also talking about unrest and civil disobedience prior to that. It's like it went down the memory hole for the left. Now, is it accidental that the Washington Post ran with this big headline today? Violent political threats surge as 2024 begins, haunting American democracy. Coincidence? Well, let me just read the first couple of paragraphs. Rusty Bowers, a former Speaker of the Arizona House of Representatives who played a pivotal role in resisting efforts to overturn the 2020 presidential election, drove into his neighborhood east of Phoenix the day after Christmas to a spine-chilling scene. His home, nestled off a dirt road in an unincorporated slice of the desert, was surrounded by sheriff's deputies. An unknown caller had reported that there was a pipe bomb inside and that a woman had been murdered. After searching the house and questioning Bowers' wife and grandson, according to Bowers and authorities, sheriff's deputies determined that neither claim was true. Now, it goes on to say the incident of swatting, this is a prank call to emergency services designed to draw law enforcement response, wasn't just a terrifying moment for Bowers and his family. It was one of the many violent threats and acts of intimidation that have defined the lives of various government officials since the 2020 election. So this just all started in 2020? This violence and this intolerance? I don't think so. I mean, yes, it was 2012 when, inspired by the Southern Poverty Law Center, a leftist organization that the Biden administration actually relies upon to track domestic terrorists, listed the Family Research Council and inspired a gunman to come in and shoot one of our employees with the desire to actually kill all of us with 100 rounds of ammunition. Now, I want to continue on here. Now, a professor at government at Harvard University, Stephen Levitsky, who studies democracies around the world, said politicians and election workers who are threatened have their lives affected, often needing to adopt new security measures or other safeguards. Yeah, tell me about it. And this happened long before 2020. I mean, I could go through the litany of threats made by the left and the results of that. Now, Levinsky noted that while violent threats span the political spectrum, the vast majority come from activists and others on the far right. And this is the article of the Washington Post. Let me continue. For instance, Representative Elise Stefanik said on NBC's Meet the Press over the weekend that she condemned violence, but she also echoed Trump's characterization of those incarcerated for their role in the violent January 6th insurrection as hostages. Oh, so if you question the left's narrative, you're promoting violence? I mean, the left, everything prior to January 2021 and 2020 apparently went down the memory hole for the left, because you remember the 2016 election deniers, which actually included President Biden and Hillary Clinton? Well, let me continue, because this is not isolated. The Washington Times, now generally a favorable publication, yesterday had an article on the same thing. President Biden has blamed former President Donald Trump and his followers for the growing wave of political violence in the U.S., but analysts say the surge in threats and attacks is a bipartisan phenomenon. Now, this goes into, let me just read first couple paragraphs. In a series of speeches to kick off the campaign year, Mr. Biden said Mr. Trump and his supporters embrace political violence and laugh about it. Those who study the issue say both sides of America's increasingly hostile politics have plenty of culpability. It's not all about Trump. There are forces on the left that are just as intemperate as Trump, said Benjamin Ginsburg, who researches political violence at Johns Hopkins University. Trump bears some of the blame, but there are plenty of Democrat politicians and operatives who are intemperate and prone to violence. Well, it's a little bit better, a little more balanced in the reporting. Maxine Waters, he pointed to Maxine Waters, told Democrats to get in the face of Republicans. It is a prelude to shooting at them, Ginsburg said. But I want to continue here before I run out of time. Last year, now this was Ginsburg. Last year, at least, this is the Washington Times reporter. Last year, at least 250 people were criminally charged in connection with political violence, according to the Justice Department data. Roughly 40 people were killed in incidents linked to politics, according to a separate study by Reuters. Now, I think this is actually an example of lazy journalism. So I went to look at Reuters, and this Reuters article was from August of 2023, and I want to read from it. The November 5th killing of Anthony King was among 213 cases of political violence identified by Reuters since the January 6, 2021 attack. Wait a minute, why is that the date where we just start tracking all of this? So everything is tracked from January 6th. Nothing before that apparently counts, except I'm going to drop down to the fifth paragraph in this Reuters article. Incidents of political violence began rising in 2016 around the time of Trump's first run for the presidency, said Gary Lafree, a University of Maryland criminologist. Well, so they don't want to count the actual incidents. They just want to say, well, it was since Trump's been around. Now, let me just put a little context here, okay? Let me talk about what happened in the summer of 2020. 140 cities were torched in the most expensive case of civil disobedience and rioting and looting that has ever taken place in the country. $2 billion. There were lives lost. It's hard to track down, but about 24 people died as a result of the riots that ensued after George Floyd. More than 2,000 police officers were injured. And of course, you recall Portland, Oregon, that went on for weeks, the demonstration there and the millions of dollars that were spent there protecting federal facilities. But that's all gone in the memory hole. We don't count any of that. It's only since January 6th have we seen these incidents of political unrest and hostility. Now, that doesn't even give me, I don't even have time to get into the attacks on churches that have taken place during the Biden administration. In fact, we are just calculating what took place in this last year, the hostility toward churches. We've seen a doubling of the attacks on churches in this last year, 412 that we've documented thus far in 2023. Now, I want to go back and I'm going to wrap this up because I've got another guest to bring on. But Ginsburg, in his interview with the Washington Times, says this: although analysts agree political violence is rising, no broad solution is apparent. Ginsburg said increased law enforcement is one solution, but he also called on Americans to avoid getting their news from only sites with political slants. Well, good luck. He said lawmakers must be more willing to compromise and find bipartisan solutions. Let me give you a solution. And it actually goes back to the first president of the United States, George Washington, in his farewell address. He says, all of the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. And then he goes on in that farewell address to say this: and let us with caution indulge the supposition that morality can be maintained without religion. Whatever may be conceded to the influence of refined education on minds of a particular structure, reason, and experience, both forbid us to expect that national morality can be maintained in exclusion of religious principle. So the very thing that we need is being driven out. That is a recognition of God and religion, allowing people to live out their faith in such a way that it affects the world around them. That, my friends, that is the answer.